Hello, everyone, for joining. We are not many today, but really nice to be here in our second Butterfly Talk. I'm Cristina Sevilleja from Dutch Butterfly Conservation, and we're really happy to organize these talks to promote more butterflies and conservation. And today we have Nigel Bourn for Butterfly Conservation UK with a lot of experience on butterflies, and he is going to talk us today about the reintroduction of the Chequered Skipper into England that happened several years ago and how the whole process went. So yeah, thank you so much, Nigel, for doing this talk. And yeah, the floor is yours.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Christina. And good afternoon to most of you. It's just about morning still here. So I'm going to talk about the reintroduction of the Chequered Skipper into England and the rules we used to do so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the science underpinning the project. I'm going to talk about the actual reintroduction, a little bit on the research that's underpinning the current reintroduction and the next steps as we go forward. And then I'm going to make some general conclusions, which I hope are broader than just the Chequered Skipper in England. So butterfly conservation has a restoration policy, BC UK. We do reintroductions. We're often perceived as not being that keen on them, but we do quite a few. But they need to be part of a wider conservation strategy, and they need to follow our key principles, which are that there is a low chance of recolonizing naturally. It needs to be, we don't really think bulking up is a great idea. The causes of initial extinction need to be understood, and they need to have been fixed, removed. Why did the species go? Do we know? Can we fix it? And there therefore needs to be confidence of the long-term habitat suitability, which comes back to the site owners and managers need to be on board, and you need to be confident that they will, continue to manage the site. And obviously, we don't want the taking of stock to have an effect on the negative effect on the donor site. So it needs to form a wider strategy for a sustainable network of sites, and I will emphasize that several times during the talk. And reintroductions for us to learn from them need to be properly monitored, recorded, and reported on, which is one reason why I'm happy to give this presentation. And let's not forget that we can learn from success or failure to improve future conservation actions. And if you remember that, then a failed reintroduction is still worth doing as long as you're fulfilling all those key principles and learning from it. So the theory underpinning BC's landscape scale conservation. So I am not about presenting this, but I decided I would give it a brief talk. Can you? Yeah, you can see my my arrow there. So this is a classic metapopulation theory graph, and it shows that the occupied sites, the black dots, tend to be in this part of the graph, which means that they are less isolated sites, and the habitat quality of those sites is higher than elsewhere. And this underpins why we as an organization tend to do landscape scale conservation, but it also underpins the design of all we do, including reintroductions. And I just thought I'd put that down. So this reintroduction was part of a massive broader project. We didn't spend 4.6 million of the Heritage Lottery funds on Chequered Skipper. We spent much less than that, but it was a big project. The largest single species conservation project in the UK, total funding of 7.7 million, and a partnership between Natural England, the state conservation body in England, and 7 species organisations, NGOs that work on species, as you can see there. In the UK, the Chequered Skipper occurs in Argyll in northwest Scotland. As you can see there, it's been restricted to that area since we've known about it. It was discovered in the 1940s. But it used to occur in the Midlands of England here, as you can see, this pale blue. And Rockingham Forest, which is the area I'm going to talk about, it's called an epicenter in England until it went extinct in 1976. This is what the project area Rockingham Forest looks like. It's a forest in the traditional Norman sense of the word. It was an area that allocated for hunting over 1,000 years ago. It's quite well wooded from an English perspective. And you can see that there's a range of sites here, from quite large ones to quite small ones to ones that are very close together, and some that are a little bit more isolated, if you think about sort of metapopulation theory. So we subdivided this area based on what we thought was the mobility of the Chequered Skipper into 5 sub-landscapes, if you like. And the project, again, I'll emphasize this again. And within that, there are key sites where either there's lots of records, so we know these were important, so occupied sites historically, or they're the larger, least isolated sites within the broader landscape. And for those of you who know England, this is Peterborough, and this is in the East Midlands. So we did quite a lot of preparation work, and this is working with colleagues from principally Belgium. Chris's name is in there as well, in the Netherlands, and several others. And this is work that was led by Dirk Maas, doing species distribution modeling to determine where, from our nearest neighbours, was the best, most similar place to Rockingham, which is roughly here, which areas here are closest to it in terms of climate, geology, etc. And it concluded basically that South Belgium was where we should be going to collect Chequered Skippers from, which is why we did. There's also some preparation work. So we did the species distribution modeling, but we also surveyed all the potential habitats, all the sites within Rockingham for their habitat quality, as I mentioned in Port. So this is a lady you'll see a lot of in this talk. This is Susanna, who's the project officer and has done most of the work that I'm talking about, if I was honest. One of the other things we had to do was, in order to get licensed to be able to import stock from abroad, was a disease risk assessment. Now, we're not vets, so we worked closely with the Institute of Zoology in London, and they determined, thankfully, because if they determined that there was a high risk of us bringing in alien pathogens, then we wouldn't have got permission to bring in the stock. But they determined that there was low risk because butterflies are migratory and there are no species-specific pathogens, really, rather than parasitoids on Chequered Skippers. So anything we brought in with the stock from Belgium would likely to already be in the British Lepidoptera populations. So that was good. That was a thumbs up, and we were allowed to go ahead. And obviously it's a big project, so we had a steering group to plan the process, and we meet every year to review progress. International, national, and local partners. And again, partnership is something that I hope will flow through this talk. So we went and collected Chequered Skippers in Belgium, and here's a picture of the volunteers and Dirk and Philippe in 2018 to collect, and we collected 42 Chequered Skippers, 30 females and 12 males, and released them that year. It was big public. There's quite a lot of big publicity push. We were on national TV and on the national news. The guy in the middle is Chris Packham. He's quite a well-known wildlife presenter within the UK, and Susanna then. So we had 2 release points, and Chris and Susanna did released one of them. So we brought them, put them into the nets overnight, let them settle overnight, and then we released them early in the next morning. It worked really well. And then there's the associated habitat management, because you want to maintain the habitat quality. You'll see a theme. So Susanna's undertaken 7.5 kilometers wide widening across 5 key sites, over 19 kilometers of mulching. What this does is remove all the thick stems of vegetation, so it allows the Forestry Commission, who manage this site, that's our State Forestry Service, to continue to mow and manage and keep the sites open. So it's a really important aspect of the project. And there was another 10 hectares managed by our agri-environment scheme, Countryside Stewardship, which I'll mention in a moment. And what does it look like? Well, many of the woods in Rockingham Forest looked principally like this, or even more dark. The tall vegetation, grassy tall vegetation that the Chequered Skipper likes, is not obviously in these thin rides, narrow rides, there's not a lot of it. So the project has opened up these rides, and this is what it looks like after the work. Much more grassy, tall grassy vegetation, which the Chequered Skipper likes, improving the habitat quality. And after 3 years, these are the sites and the areas that we worked on. And it was about £100,000 worth of extra management on top of what the Forestry Commission and others were doing in these woods, funded by the lottery as part of this massive Back from the Brink project. And how's the Chequered Skipper done? So we released it in 2018, and we released a few more in 2019 before COVID obviously reared its ugly head in 2020, and we couldn't go over and get a third release, which we were planning to do. And the two figures at the top here, these were the release sites in 2018, these were the release sites in 2019, and it colonized about 2.8 hectares. I'm sorry, what am I saying? 49 hectares and 2.8 kilometers of ride in its first year. So we were really encouraged by that. But by 2021, you can see it's occupied 5.1 kilometers of ride and 86 hectares of the site. So it's been gradually spreading out each year, which gives us some encouragement that the site is suitable. And just to show you what that looks on a map, this is basically the pattern of the rides within the wood, but you can see as each year goes, it's spreading slowly through the wood, which is great. And just to give you the figures, first thing to mention is the amazing effort of the volunteers who allow us to collect this data. Over 179 days of volunteer time in the wood to do this. What's the important? One thing, of course, is that the ratio, the female, because males emerge first, the ratio, male to female ratio, changes through the season and gives us some indication as to where they are in the season. And this low ratio in 2020, we could only get out on May the 15th. Before that, COVID lockdowns meant that we missed the start of the season, which is why I think numbers are lower. In the first year. I think in the first 2 years, numbers were pretty similar, really. Total number of sightings there. I think we just missed the first half of the season, as indicated by the sex ratio. And 2021 was numbers were down slightly, but from the previous 2 years, effectively. But I think that's also what happened in Belgium and the Netherlands. I'm not sure. Maybe Irma could tell us, but I think numbers of Chequered Skipper were down generally. So that's just a natural sort of response to weather, we think. The key thing being that it is still spreading through the woodland. I mentioned ZSL. This is Tony, he's the vet, and we did bring a few over in 2021. We weren't able to go to Belgium because of COVID, but we did carry over a few, and Dirk Mass collected a few for us and brought them over. And this is Tony the vet from ZSL, just to checking the quality of them and making sure that they're healthy and fit, which we've done every year. And in the first 2 years, we were able to assess their state and their health in Belgium when we collected them and when we got back, so we could show that the travel, the 8 hours in a car, if you like, from Belgium to the Midlands of England hadn't impacted on their wing wear and the number of legs they had, and all that. We kept them cool and they came over in good condition, which is great to have that evidence. And here we are. Here we are. I just thought I'd show a picture of me releasing one, just so for posterity to show that I've done something. So we're releasing a few in 2021. I've mentioned research. We've got 2 PhD students who are studying the Reintroduction. Georgina Halford, who's working with Jenny Hodgson at Liverpool, and Professor Ilka Saatchi. Quite a genetics-focused project, looking at the genetics of the donor populations in Belgium and the introduced populations, were there founder effects, etc. How many of those 30 females were successful in the first year? Can we determine that? How many do you actually need to do a successful reintroduction? Those sorts of questions. Jamie from Northampton University is working with Professor Jeff Ollerton, and his is a bit more of a traditional biological, ecological PhD. looking at patterns of extinction, about population theory, and the behaviour of the species, the individuals in England when we release them, those sorts of things. I ummed and ahed about presenting this. This was actually the targets for the outreach, but I wanted to make the point really that it's not all about conservation. If you want to do reintroductions, I think you have to bring the local people with you. They need to know. And this, okay, it's only a butterfly. It's not lynx, where people will have to do an awful lot more of this if we want to introduce apex predator into the UK. But, you know, it's important to get people on board with you when you're doing something like this. So we had a whole range as part of the project, outreach events, going up a sort of pyramid of engagement, from working with the local schools, upskilling volunteers to do ID work, working with woodland owners to explain about woodland management and the principles of woodland management, and then the one-to-one advice. So that was an ongoing program of work that underpinned the project, really. Talking about the future, we've now got funding from something called the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, which is from DEFRA, from the government, to take it forward. It's broadened slightly, so it's not just about checker skippers. Did I mention that we're working on adders? Butterfly Conservation are doing adder work with our amphibian and reptile partners. We have been doing that, and we're continuing to do that, which is great. And we're hoping, and to go over to Belgium in a few months' time to collect a few more, just to beef it up and ensure that the genetics is okay. It's a big partnership. I showed you the picture of the steering group with about 25 people from about 15 organisations. That builds, and the longer you go on into a landscape, that partnership builds, and there's a few more extra people in there. We're going to, as I say, we're going to do reintroductions. We're doing further habitat management. We're taking a leaf out of the large blue. The large blue introduction into the UK, when it became untenable not to share the joy, if you like, and open up the access to the sites, they funded rangers in the summer to help manage the natural interest in people who wanted to see that species. So we've also got funding for 2 seasonal rangers who've just been recruited to help manage because last month we had if I was giving this talk before Christmas, I wouldn't have been able to name the site, which is Fine Shade in Rockingham. And I wouldn't have been able to mention that because it was a secret, because we didn't want people to come along and trample the habitat, because it's still such a fragile toehold in the country. But we've now had a major press release, which was in national newspapers, naming the site. And as a consequence, partly that was enabled because we've got funding from the government for 2 seasonal rangers who can manage that engagement, make sure that people stick to the footpaths and try hard and not trample what is still, as I say, a very fragile toehold in England. And those are the sites for the taking sites. And again, if we come back to the original 5 landscapes, we're still working in those. I've failed to mention these 3 sites here, which is another landscape. A lot of the sub-landscapes is the one that's benefiting from the countryside stewardship. So we are working in each of those 5 landscapes. This is Fine Shade, where it's been introduced to. We're keen to get it into other sites to enable it to then spread across the landscape. This is a National Nature Reserve. It's a very well-known historically site. The next successful indicator, I think, that was functioning and working is when it starts colonizing these sites on its own. So we're going to build it, put it into these 5 sub-sites, and then we're going to sit back and hopefully do a lot of management and watch it colonize and become established, truly established, which is what the long-term aim is, clearly. So what are the key lessons just before I finish? Reintroductions are not a quick, easy fix. Species go extinct usually after several years of something happening badly, something going wrong. In Rockingham's case, the woodland management was reduced. It became forestry rather than woodland. It became too dark, and it took an awful lot of effort pre our involvement, our topping up, to make it really special for Chequered Skipper. there was a lot of opening up anyway from the Forestry Commission, from the State Forestry. So they're not quick, easy wins, because long-term decline takes quite a lot of effort to fix. And it does take careful planning, long-term commitment, a broad partnership and support that you need to do. And this can often be costly. As I say, I mean, 100,000, it's not a lot in the global scale of things, but for us, it's quite a big project. That's quite a lot of money. And we've only just started. We've got it into one site, into one of the sub-sites, and we're going to hopefully get it into a second in the next year or two. And when we review introductions, generally they're not very successful. And possibly mainly because I don't think they've done the 3 previous things. They've not fixed the issues to why the species went extinct in the first place. But as long as you do the monitoring and the research, you can get valuable insights. So they're worth doing, I think. And national and local conservation strategies should provide a framework for priorities. And this is a note to self, really, that we, BC, need to produce better resources, case studies and publicity to communicate when it's good to do reintroductions, when perhaps there isn't the commitment locally and the commitment to the management and the long term, or the landscape is so far away from where it was. Large copper in England springs to mind. The landscape needs so much fixing, it's going to take an awful long time. And an awful lot of commitment. So I think that's probably all I should say, apart from I should thank Susanna, who's done most of the real work on the ground, provided most of the slides. Dirk and Philippe in Balsam have been absolutely brilliant. Their local knowledge has just been, well, we couldn't have done it without them. And Sam Ellis, people may know, he developed some of the original project ideas, developed the project. Dan, people know as well from BC, our Director of Conservation, who he and I discussed reintroductions and the theory behind them quite a lot. And I'd like to thank the volunteers in both England and Belgium, because they've both been brilliant, and the ever-expanding partners. And thank you for listening. So I'll take any questions. Thank you.